welcome everybody. This is the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development, our welcoming table talk. We do this the third Thursday of every month. You can mark your calendars and do an array of topics relevant to improving the cultures and diversity reflection in our faith-based NGOs. Because as you know, we do struggle in the Christian NGO world with having a good representation of people of color and women, particularly around leadership and influence tables. 70% of the workforce are women, but less than 15% of the leadership is women in these organizations. And we know from the corporate world, we've got all this great research that says organizations perform better when there's greater diversity around their leadership tables. Yeah. So why wouldn't we want that for important organizations and the work that we're doing in the faith-based NGO sector? So today we have the wonderful opportunity to have a good conversation with Dr. Alexis Brown. She is the Chief People Officer, I believe is what CPO stands for. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. Chief People Officer at World Relief. I've only seen one other NGO use that title, and it was World Vision years and years ago. So she's going to come and share some of the good things. World Relief is really on a great journey towards creating a culture of belonging. Nobody has arrived at this, ideal spot, but they have been doing very solid things consistently for the last few years to increase diversity of women, and particularly women of color, around their leadership and influence tables, as well as addressing culture in the organization as a whole to make it a more welcoming space for everyone. And when we improve our cultures for women and people of color, we improve our cultures for everybody. The same criteria and qualities that people look for in those kinds of ideal cultures, they benefit everybody, as you're going to hear when we move through the conversation today. So we just want to say welcome, Alexis, and thank you so much for taking your time to do this with us today.
Not a problem.
Yeah, we get a really good conversation going on these sessions that we'll have Q&A time at the end of our conversation. And then a lot of folks we know who aren't able to take time out of their workday, they watch the YouTube recording, because all of our table talks are available on the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development YouTube channel. So rather than reading your bio, because it's a good one, tell me a little bit about let's just start here. How long have you been serving with World Relief?
So I've been at World Relief for 2 years. I've been in this role at CPO just over a year, since April. So yeah.
And prior to coming to World Relief, where were you serving?
I've served in I've been in the NGO space for, I hate to say, like 20 plus years at this point. I realized when I was looking back on some of my old documents, I had 10 years, then I see 15 years. I said, okay, I guess I got to update again. So it's been 20 years in this space. And so I've worked for government in the public sector as well. Worked for large organizations, small organizations, faith-based, secular, and a lot in the organizational development, executive administration type of roles. And to where I am today. When I joined World Relief, I came in as a business partner, an HR business partner, and then went into senior HR business partner, and then went into this role. So it's been a very interesting journey.
Yeah. That's actually a really good place to start, because as a people manager, as a business manager in the organization, you're learning both the organization side as well as the issues affecting those that you've been assigned to be the business partner of. In fact, my favorite business partner from my job at Compassion International is on the call, Jackie Keene. So she was my business partner at Compassion. And I didn't even actually understand the role until I started working with Jackie and came to realize the huge benefit of it. So, but you have an MBA from Eastern University that I just found out today.
Right.
And you have a Master's of Public Administration. Is that what the MBA? Sorry,
Yeah.
doctorate.
Yeah, doctorate in public administration. That's the short term. It actually was public policy and nonprofit administration. Short version, public administration.
Great.
And then yeah, the MBA in management from Eastern.
Okay. What
So.
What attracted you to a doctorate degree in that subject area? It's an interesting area.
So I was interested in that actually at the master's level as well. I actually started to pursue MS in nonprofit management. That's what I was thinking about doing. And I said, well, you know what? Nonprofits are still a business. And I didn't want everything to just be geared to nonprofit. I wanted it to be a broader business degree, and literally change like at the, I want to say maybe a week before I started classes. And then, so I always knew I wanted to dive a little deeper into the public administration space, but I wanted a solid business and operational development platform to work from as well.
Yeah.
So
well,
that was really why I sort of married the two.
That serves you really well, considering the direction that the sector is going in more integration with other spheres. You know, so
yeah.
our development sector is getting blurred when it comes to who's actually doing development. So you have more and more companies doing good, good in the communities where they source their materials around the world, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It gives us opportunity for potential partnerships. So, well, today you and I had been talking for a while on LinkedIn and others on what does it look like to really help our faith-based NGOs create a culture of belonging. And I know through Mile and some others that World Relief, some of the things that World Relief has been doing. So what I wanted to spend our conversation today talking about what's World Relief doing that seems to be working so well, and even your more broader level insights on what are the keys that organizations can be doing. So why don't you start off with how the goal about diversity came about at World Relief, and what has been communicated to you as your mandate?
I think the goal, so when I came in as a business partner, diversity was top on the list. So I really spent time just listening to the field, listening in terms of questions. And I can tell you it came up literally in almost in conversations, like at least once a week, at least. It's a high interest that employees and staff have around diversity and making sure that there is a welcoming environment, a sense of belonging. We spend a lot of time at work, and we want to be proud of the environment that we're in. So that message was very, very clear, not just from leadership, but also I heard it from staff and various levels in the organization. So the mandate, if you will, was around we want World Relief to be more diverse, but it was, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? There was a consultant involved, and she did some initial work that I think was really helpful, just simply even around language and the difference between being multicolor and multicultural. And being very clear around, are we just checking boxes and say, okay, we have a Black one of these now, and so we're good? Or are we really looking at how we're really bringing people in and welcoming people to the organization? So having that conversation around, just in terms of language as a start, was helpful, and to have some definitions and clarity around what we're talking about. Because diversity is a huge, you can talk about welcoming all kinds of individuals, and we focused heavily on gender and ethnicity. And we had to make that clear as well. It doesn't mean that everything else isn't important, but you do have to define what you're doing, because you'll end up spreading yourself so thin that you won't really see progress anywhere if you don't really define it and narrow the focus. It became much more comfortable, honestly, to talk about it. And I think that is an important first step. I would often make jokes about and say, well, guys, I'm a Black woman, in case you haven't noticed. And they were like, oh my gosh, you said that out loud. So, and I said, at least I was when I joined the call. Now I know we're living in a world of fast-paced change, but as far as I know, I still am. So just trying to really tear down that uncomfortable space about talking about who we are individually. Because some of my best experiences have been people who are not part of my culture. And so we really have to, I really felt strongly about saying we have to break down this wall, and people need to feel more comfortable having these conversations internally.
And I love the fact that you started with just basic terminology.
Yeah.
And making it clear when World Relief is talking diversity initiative and focus initially, that it was those two areas. I think
yes.
People who feel like they're not reflected in diversity targets can feel afraid that suddenly they are left out. So that's my question, just a follow-up question. How was this? You had said that in your business partner role, lots of people were saying diversity was important. Diversity was important. How did you go about communicating that, or Mile and the rest of the exec team communicate that internally, so that it didn't create an us versus them type dynamic with those who were in the majority, homogeneous group? Yeah.
Well, first of all, it was part of the strategic plan. So when I came in even still at the business partner level, there were strategic focus groups, if you will, and I was co-leading one of those groups. And this was part of it. How are we going to make World Relief more diverse? And had a process that we went through, listening to individuals who were in the group, and making some very clear recommendations that were then carried forth into the actual strategic plan that we actually followed. But it was so important for top leadership to weigh in and to support this work, because it cannot be on top of what you're doing. If it's not part of the real fabric of the organization, if top leadership doesn't support it, it really won't go anywhere. So that was key in making and seeing this work really take flight.
So it's one thing to set goals. What do you do when people say, isn't that quotas? Isn't that just a quota system? And isn't a quota system inherently unfair?
Well, that's the difference between multicolor and being multicultural. Mm-hmm. Right? So let's talk about it from a sense of even hiring. One of the things that I find is that when people start talking about diversity, they usually lean toward hiring because that's an easier task, if you will. Well, we need another one we need somebody of color on the team. Let's look at people of color who are in terms of applicants, and exactly check the box. And you will move in more in a direction of quota, as opposed to making sure that you're in communities where people of color and diverse individuals may be, so that they see those job announcements that are out, so that the job description and the language that you use is inviting for individuals. And actually had the job description analyzed, had 2 job description analyzed to see what the results would be. And one was leaned toward heavily white males. Actually both did. And so just did that again recently. And the results were, it was leaning toward females, which made sense because that department was also primarily female. So when they developed it, I'm sure. So really just being the awareness is key. But quotas, that is a strong difference between being multicolor and being multicultural, and we're striving to be multicultural.
Yeah, great. So, was there any tangible pushback from different groups within the organization? You know, the hallway chatter, let me give you an example. One organization I worked with, I was tasked with increasing women in leadership roles. The next day on Glassdoor was a very negative comment. Now, this was just to research the subject, not to do anything. I wasn't in a role that could do anything, but to research the subject. The next day on Glassdoor, there was a very negative public comment, and the title of it, "White Men Need Not Apply at This Organization." And so they didn't feel like they had a safe space to go and share their fear, and it is fear driven, you know. So they took it public. Did you see any kinds of, like, you know, how did the organization help people find a safe space to have those fear conversations? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my, desire for a future promotion, et cetera?
Sure. I think, I mean, that's a good and unfortunate experience, but it is real. It absolutely happens. One thing that did happen when we had a variety of workshops around the multicultural, as I said. So we had a series of workshops, gave staff an opportunity to really have some understanding around what it is, and talk about even their comfort level around it. And through that, and that was led by a consultant. And through that work, she was getting private messages. I was getting private messages, people who were uncomfortable in either in their environment, or uncomfortable because they feel like they may have to take some ownership of what has happened. And so you see sort of a range of challenges, and we really just made that very known and very visible, not by the person, but we have to recognize all our challenges, from not really understanding, not knowing, to knowing, and people being uncomfortable in their space. And I know, yeah, sure, people were not, I'm sure there were people not in favor. I mean, I had someone in the organization who's not currently there say, "Alexis, do you feel like you were put in this role as CPO because you're a Black woman?" I said, "Well, since I haven't been anything else, I don't know how to even answer that. So if that's the reason, so be it. That's not my issue. That's someone else's issue." So we've got to be clear about it and not take that on.
I would like all of us as women to get better at the comebacks. Now, it may not be helpful, but I can be a bit snarky. So my response would be, have you ever wondered if you're in your position because you're a white man? If we know that bias exists, if we know that the organization is, leans towards 90% men in leadership, do you ever wonder that you only got the role?
Yes, I like that. I'm gonna use that, Beth. I'm gonna steal that from you. I'm gonna use that.
I give that to you freely, my sister. I give that to you freely.
I can't wait to use it, actually.
But we don't ever stop to question.
No.
That a biased system has continued to perpetuate, and we're all guilty of doing it. You know, we are people who want to be surrounded by people that we know and that we like and that are like us. The problem is that we work for organizations that want to be a reflection of the kingdom of God around the world, but the organizations themselves aren't reflecting the diversity of the kingdom of God in the organization. Doesn't that make us a bunch of hypocrites hopping around from country to country in Africa and Asia and Latin America? So yeah. No, that's great. So it sounds like one of my questions was, those workshops and those trainings that you were doing, were you also doing them in the field offices? So the Africa offices, Latin America,
so I went to a couple of offices after
Mhm.
those sessions. And then that's when I transitioned into this role.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so really started looking at to how we're going to make a deeper, not just a good commitment, but how we're going to have real lasting change
Mhm.
around this. So as a result of the strategic work that was done, we did establish a group that we called multicultural advisors, who were advisors to the executive committee.
Okay.
And their job, they were to be in place. Actually, they just were transitioning now the advisors into culture focal points.
Oh, yeah.
Now, yes. And so, and their role was to help move this needle, if you will, and give the executive committee real substantive feedback and advice around how we can move this needle.
Yeah.
So they did some foundational work around that. And one of the things that I think was really, really important was just the communication around these multicultural topics and to talk about it. And so all of us on the executive committee as well, we talked more about it in our newsletter, in our correspondence. We needed people, staff, to see more communication around this in almost in a way that is blended in, if you will, integrated in our daily practices, not on top of what we're doing, not as a side dish, but really to start to weave this in to what we're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And looking at data, like where are we? We have a number of individuals in the majority culture who are in leadership roles, and how do we want to shape that? Where do we want to go with that? And how are we going to move that? Right today, the executive committee is it went from a majority culture to over half of it now being of color, and 75% of it being female. So it
Mhm.
was a major transition. I think it's so important. Staff can't just hear, they just can't hear the words. They have to see the change. If you expect the change, you have to really model it and do it. Otherwise, I think it just sounds like words to them, empty words.
Well, and I think that's where cynicism and disengagement comes in. You know, we before the call, before our session today, we were talking about employee engagement and, you know, Gallup engagement instruments and stuff.
Yeah,
And you were right to point out that when we talk about these things like culture of belonging, you know, at the end of the day, we're getting back to the root of it, which is the feeling engaged.
yeah,
And if you feel like your leadership is all talk and no action, or this issue of diversity comes up whenever there's a public headline, and then
yeah,
suddenly it's off to the sideline yet again, you can become jaded, and then you can
yeah,
become somebody who just shows up, does the basics of their work, collects their paycheck, and goes home. You know,
yeah,
and we don't want that. We don't want that. I'm not saying that we should make idols of our work, but God has given us talents to exercise them, and a community of people to exercise them in. And we want to be fully present for that part of our lives.
right, correct,
And it's not easy.
absolutely. No, and when you talk about engagement, I I almost exchanged the two words between engagement and belonging, because you can talk about diversity and we know that's very different than belonging. So when we were also diving into it from a strategic planning process, we were very intentional with we're focusing on belonging, not just diversity, which has a broader implication than just looking at how we're different,
Mhm.
and how we describe ourselves from an ethnic and gender perspective. So it was very intentional from the beginning. Yeah.
How do you take a pulse of how your employee base feels at World Relief when it comes to whether people feel like they belong. So Gallup has the big engagement survey. It's quite expensive. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, how are you doing a regular pulse to say, you know, we've done the hiring, we've done all these workshops, we've done training. Are people feeling it in their day-to-day interactions with colleagues, with their supervisors, et cetera? How are you taking a pulse?
Well, part of the I guess the broadest way that we're doing it is still using the Gallup survey, using those DEI questions that they have. So we've been doing that for the last 2 years. We still have work, definitely, we still have work to do, just saw some increase from where we were last year, so that's good. But more to your point, how are you really getting a sense and a pulse? And really just through conversation with individuals in the offices. It could be with directors, and in talking about, right now, I just hired a director of culture, and one of her main jobs is to complete our culture model. And that model we're looking at where we are organizationally and what our organizational culture already looks like. So we are of a clan culture, not clan with a K, but with a C, right? And
Yeah.
that sort of family oriented type of model, what does that look like with diversity? So really blending in and looking at who we are and how are we going to keep developing ourselves from a cultural standpoint, and blending that in, even with performance, and really performance and support from a managerial and a director level, really even down to one-on-one conversations that have to happen really on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
I mean, the work is not separate to me. You don't have culture work over here, performance over here, engagement over. It's all integrated. It's all, you really need to know how to blend it appropriately. So even managers that are uncomfortable, and we've heard that they may be uncomfortable having conversations with an individual, maybe if they're particular. I've had individuals I've talked to that certainly are of another culture, and I'm not sure how to approach something. I just ask them, is this okay if I ask you this? Is this okay if I do this? Is this some individuals of other cultures don't like to be recognized publicly. Yet if you follow Gallup, you know, engagement, and a part of the engagement model is really high recognition. And I had to ask people around that. I wanted to recognize you on this Zoom call. Is that going to be okay? And they told me no. It's not going to be okay. So you have to be willing to just just ask the question. It's okay not to know.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because I tend to praise people a lot without asking permission. So Jackie,
with somebody I don't usually, well, people that I interact with in my own team, I know better. Obviously I know when I know it's okay. But if it's someone that I don't normally engage with, then I'm going to ask more questions because I don't know.
It's an interesting. So last month we were talking mental health and things that we can be doing, and one of the subjects came up about how supervisors can sometimes struggle with having that part of the conversation with those they supervise. Today we're talking about, diversity and recognizing cultural differences. Years ago, we were talking about the supervisory role becoming one of coach rather than
boss.
What does World Relief do to provide all people managers, all supervisors, with that extra skill base to be really good at this? Are you doing anything that targets supervisors?
We have training, and this is another area where we are moving forward with more deliberate training specifically for supervisors and managers. Managers need just as much support because of all the challenges that they're facing today than I think they even did before. Even the engagement scores, I was looking at an overall article that Gallup put out recently, and they were talking about the sharp decline in engagement scores, and in part because managers are facing some extraordinary challenges that they didn't before. And those, that relationship with manager makes a difference on those scores. We do have some resources for managers when they first start as a manager. But I also just hired a director of talent development, and that's one of the things that she's diving into it more, is very concrete training. Specifically, I said we're focusing on supervisors and managers first, and bringing more to the table. I also just did a contract with LinkedIn Learning, just to expand some opportunities there. And we do a leadership institute now, do a leadership for emerging leaders in the organization. And so one of the things that the director of development is going to be charged with is moving and developing that leadership institute more for individuals within World Relief.
Nice.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work that we're doing, but there's still quite a bit that needs to be done.
Oh, for sure, always.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know how you've been able to integrate, or do you integrate some of these new expectations of hiring diversity, creating a culture of belonging? Have you started to weave that into performance metrics, performance evaluation, particularly like asking the questions,
From a performance perspective, the way where we are right now is supporting and giving supervisors and managers the tools, and with the expectation that they are conducting regular performance check-ins. And then we're giving them some specific questions and information that is more coaching questions that they incorporate, as opposed to doing the management at the end of the year, and doing goals at the beginning of the year. So that's where we are, and where they are actually doing it, the check-in formally within our HRIS. Where the employee has questions, and the supervisor has questions, but they're check-ins, they're formal check-ins. And excuse me, the reason we did that is to support the weekly check-ins. We wanted to make sure that something is happening on a regular basis before we get to the end of the year. By the time you get to the end of the year, that final check-in should be really easy. It should be very, very easy, very simple.
Yeah, I forget what those are called when you do those more periodic performance conversations. There was, a bunch of Harvard literature talking about this, a couple of years ago, and we had tried it in a couple of organizations. It's funny how, until they started seeing in a performance evaluation, there is this expectation that you're going to become a coach of your people. Many people never thought about that when they became a people manager. Or they didn't feel skilled at it. They were exceptional in their IT technical division. They did not have a human conversation.
Right.
So providing that support to them, I think, is key. So I'm so glad that you're doing that.
And it is having those structured, regular conversations is a way to really drive home the diversity. And giving the managers the questions that they don't have to stick with those questions, but it also takes the pressure off of them trying to figure it out. And I think you really need to give them the tools, and as they become more comfortable with it, they have what I call I said, you can have a drive-by conversation as a check-in. It can be 10 minutes. to check in, once you get in that rhythm and that pattern. But giving them the tools is essential. And then
It's also
putting it,
a form of relationship building.
oh yeah, absolutely. It is. I mean, it's one-on-one time. I did some a little research when I was a business partner. I was looking at staff who had been in an organization 90 days and staff who had been in an organization close to 6 months. But I talked to them. So we do a 90-day report. And so I reached out and said, I wanted to get with some real specific, real quick questions. And they were, of course, they were gracious. Oh, it's a wonderful experience. I'm learning a lot, but it's a lot of work and a lot of information. Once I get closer to that 6 months, then I noticed they started to be more critical in their analysis of their relationship with their manager, but not that the manager was a bad manager, but the manager didn't have time for them because they were so busy.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have no place to go with my questions, but to my team. I have a great team. I heard that over and over and over. I have a good manager. They're so busy. But they just don't have time for me. That was the message. And I said, wow. Now we since did a lot of hiring to help because we also had a lot of positions, but hearing that message, and you see people are, they need that time, and this almost becomes a bit more of a demand. I need the time of my manager to be able to ask questions. I can ask my teammates. I have a great team. They answer my questions, but sometimes I need my manager to answer some of these questions.
Yeah.
Not just my team.
We were talking before the call, the struggle of, when managers are also managing their own amount of work and keep getting, because they're a great manager, they keep getting added more people to their team, and each one of those requires a weekly check-in, more coaching. So how does the manager make space for all this? So yeah.
I've done coaching conversations on when I'm walking in the park, when I'm sitting on the deck. It's just amazing. That's the beauty of working remote, I guess, but it does become more comfortable so that the staff will start to ask questions. You want them to bring information to the table. It is a partnership. It doesn't have to all come from the manager. It's around, what do you need? What are your questions? Where are you struggling? What's not clear? How are you doing with this project? I know this was an issue. The questions will start to flow once they get used to the process.
That's great. I think I'd like to open it up to our group to see what questions we have. There was one question posted to me. Let me see if I understand it. Once this became a priority at World Relief, diversity, equity, and inclusion, was there a difference in how people challenged microaggression and unconscious bias? Once this became a priority at World Relief, was there any difference in how people challenged microaggressions and unconscious bias? And then the second part was there a difference in how those with bias responded? So I guess, did it make people more willing to challenge microaggressions? And did those that were, microaggressing or that were exuding and demonstrating bias, were they more gracious and understanding? I guess is the question.
I think from what I've heard, because you never know what people are thinking sometimes if they don't voice it. But what I heard generally was a bit more of a comfort level in saying what they either did not know or what they were not sure about, or what they used to think.
Yeah.
And so, and realizing that what they used to think came from, of course, their experiencing, how they grew up, their family dynamic. And that's what I heard, more willingness to talk about that And we actually was just talking about this the other day. When you have sessions like that, when people, we were in in working with, so we're developing individuals to be culture focal points, as we call it. And so one of the training is you're looking and you're diving into self, right? Into yourself, and you're thinking about some of your own bias, and you're thinking about some of how you developed some of the thoughts and some of where your experiences came from. But then you're articulating that to the group.
Yeah.
And when you articulate that and people understand you, that is the very start and essence, in my opinion, of developing that relationship. And when you understand where people are coming from, and we just call them come froms, that's what the consultants, so that's like a familiar term that we use. And every time I hear it, I'm like, yes, the language worked, it worked, right? Then there becomes this level of understanding and even forgiveness when you're doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. Because we're going to get something wrong. We're going to say something wrong, or we're going to do something. Like, I think people would be more willing to accept because they understand a little bit more. So I have seen more of that. Is it perfect? Of course not. Are there people that I think that don't agree with this work? Absolutely. And what I see is there's silence. And silence, and that's what we were talking about. I said silence does not mean agreement. It could still be, depending on their culture, that they're not quite comfortable. It could be they're not quite comfortable because of their supervisor or manager where they're working for whatever reason. And then there's individuals who are in managerial or director level roles that I know I really get the strong impression that they are no more interested in multicultural work than anything at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suspect as we keep moving forward in this work, that they may just disappear from where we live. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it may discover that not everybody should be necessarily in a people manager role. You may be great at your technical skill, and so let there be a path for people who don't want to manage others, that just want to be good at their technical expertise. Now, not being able to get along with a multicultural team is also a problem. But I think I like what you're saying about doing the trainings that you did required people to do the self-reflection on where did I come from and where's my bias, because I think we all have to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it always feels like we're talking about how do we fix white men.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not it.
That's not it.
It's all of us probing, where do I come from? Because I've had men who've been great people managers, and they're managing women who are just triggered all the time, and they're almost looking for something to do a gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, that's statement, that's and so that's a brokenness in a woman that needs this kind of healing first and foremost with God, but needs some healing, because we can't be operating in our day-to-day with this constant I gotcha. That was culturally insensitive, that was gender insensitive, that was at some point we have to be also exhibiting the grace that has been exhibited to us. And so I like the reflection work that you talk about, where it's asking everybody to be thinking about what are your trigger points and how do you manage those so that you are not crouched in this gotcha position,
and that's not something I led. I want to be clear about that. We brought in a consultant. So just one thing was helpful is to understand, you do have to understand your challenges so you can understand what you need to address and know where you're going. So with that plan in mind, so somebody came on my porch. I have a delivery, and my dog has to make sure that they know that they're being watched. So
dogs are welcome at the welcoming table talk. Mine is laying sound asleep right next to me, but okay, let's turn it over to the audience. You can turn your microphones back on, friends, if you have a question to ask. Anybody have any questions? We saw the one in the chat box that we addressed, I think.
I have a question for Alexis, and having worked at World Relief both before Alexis arrived and during Alexis's time there, and having just stayed in touch and still love the World Relief family. I just want to give a public shout out to all of the work Alexis has done. It really is remarkable. And Alexis, it's, I hear from my friends at World Relief all the time what a difference you've made. So I just want you to know that your work is really, really matters. And I'm really grateful for you. My question is for those of
I paid off the right people. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, exactly. The check was big and I really appreciate it.
And Mary, did you ask her permission first if you could give her praise on Zoom?
I'm sorry, Alexis, may I publicly praise your amazing abilities?
Mary is my colleague.
It is embarrassing. I just want you to know it is embarrassing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. And it's working.
She is our praise machine.
At any rate, my question is, when I transitioned out of my role and was, took a sabbatical and was looking for other work, I was really conscious of making sure that I found an organization that did have a welcoming culture and was embracing diversity. And so when I was looking, I was trying to look strategically, and I was wondering if you had recommendations for everyone on this call about what to look for in an organization, and diversity on boards of directors and in leadership. But also when you're speaking, and I was curious about job descriptions, even looking at job descriptions and how they're written and what kind of keywords to be looking for, so that we can make sure that we're using our skills and talents in organizations that really have an embracing, welcoming culture.
Sure. I think when you're looking, I think the best opportunity, sure, you can look on a website, you can see what an organization is doing, see what they're involved in. But I think the best opportunity is in interviews and asking what they're doing. And I wouldn't ask the question around just, what are you doing around diversity? But something to really highlight a little bit more. How do you approach, what's your managerial approach for engaging staff, working with staff, and see how they answer? Because as soon as you hear the diversity word, that's a trigger.
Yeah.
And they're going to give you the answer that you want, as opposed to you being able to discern the answer that you're really looking for, which is what recruiters, that's what we do all the time. When we're looking for certain skill sets, we frame a scenario-based question to see are they demonstrating the skill that we're looking for. So I would do the same thing with employers. I mean, and see what's happening. Ask them what they're doing when staff first start. How are they welcoming new people on board?
Great.
As a question.
And staying with the engagement, because all these organizations talk about engagement. So staying with the engagement topic, they absolutely will have, absolutely will have stuff to share. And then be listening for what that looks like. That's excellent.
And I would just say, what do you do? How do you bring new people on, as opposed to how are you welcoming new people into? Because again, there's certain words that will trigger, and they'll say, okay, let's highlight this aspect. And you're trying to really gauge, are they really doing this, or is it just language that they're using?
Yeah. So another question for you: can you say again, just repeat the difference between multicolor and multicultural?
So multicolor is literally just more about the category that a person would be in, right? They're a Black person, they're a white person, they're Asian. That's why it lends itself to the issue of using quotas. Multicultural is about welcoming individuals, regardless of course, their ethnicity, into a space and recognizing that. And it's not about how many you have of any particular culture. There are ways also that we talked about just embracing individuals from different cultures, that we made, as part of our foundational model, as well. But I think the big thing to recognize, even when you're talking about multicultural, is that you may not have an understanding, definitely, of every single culture that's being welcomed into your organization. So in some cultures, of course, I may, and we had a consultant come in and talk about those two things. And what they really highlighted, and I like it on sort of a rating scale. She did 100, 200, 300, 400, 400 meaning that you really understand the culture. 100 is you really don't understand it all. So as it relates to one culture, you may not understand much at all. And then another culture, you may really have some clear understanding, but you have to recognize where you are so that you know then what to do, what questions to ask, and things along those lines, so that you can become more aware and know that it's okay that you may or may not be aware.
Yeah.
I am so not in place. One of the organizations that I worked for that I felt the most out of place was an organization that was primarily Black females.
And what made you feel out of place? What was it?
The language used, the conversation, the interest, the way they engage with each other, very different than my own come-froms.
Okay.
Very different. To the point, a couple of them said, Alexis, what are you doing here? I said, I don't know. But I started saying, I'm not going to be here long. So I have no clue, because you are not my people at all.
Yeah.
I need to go find my people, because you aren't it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find some people are very sensitive to org culture. I'm very sensitive to org culture, but part of it is I teach a doctoral class every summer. I'm teaching right now on organizational culture.
Mhm.
And so I'm just sensitive to when it's not a fit for me versus ones that feel like home, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget what my follow-up question was going to be. Other questions from the audience? Oh, are there examples to illustrate how it was different for you and out of place? Oh, in that same story you were just telling. Yeah.
And it's been in other environments. I've been in environments that are heavily white males, and that was very difficult environment as well. And you feel the out of place feeling. Sometimes it's just the look, the way they treat you, the expectation, really the demeaning of your role, and what you're delivering, what it is that that kind of discounted, I would say. And I've seen that at top with CEOs. I've seen it I had a boss who was a female, a Latina female, and the CEO disrespected her so horribly, literally yelling and screaming and carrying on. And to the point I told her, I said, listen, I know you're my boss, but you really need to not endure that. Mm-hmm. Just because he can do it, why are you allowing him to get away with it?
Yeah.
And she said, well, Alexis, he holds he's the boss. I said, that's not an excuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not an excuse. And the minute you let him do it to you, he's going to do it to anybody else in this organization, because now he thinks he has free reign to treat anybody any way. I couldn't get that point across, but have been in spaces with males in particular, who, like I said, really demean your position. And if you don't acquiesce, then they were environments I had to leave.
Yeah.
I had to just leave.
Well, that's the sad part, is that it's always, the people that are being terrorized, so to speak, by a leader's demeanor that wind up having to leave. And a bad
And what I,
CEO is
Mhm.
just so hard to get rid of, because
And what I saw in my boss was fear. And I don't know if it was fear to keep her job. I saw something a little bit different. It was really literally the fear because of the way he was treating her. And which went beyond the job.
Yeah.
Whereas I had someone do that to me, and it was a male. There was no fear. It was actually the reverse. I actually had to say in my head, remember, you're a Christian, and you're gonna leave this problem with him. But I still had to come strongly. And when you're coming on someone who's coming at you like that, your disposition has to be different. You have to change. I can be a very easygoing person until, like anyone else, I'm not. My voice changes. I drop my voice, my stance changed to the point when I did that, it like took him back, and he was like so shocked. I just saw him actually look me up on LinkedIn a little while ago. And it just brought it all back. I started to say, don't look at my profile. What do you want?
creepy.
I came back.
LinkedIn stalking.
Right, exactly. That's what it felt like. But I find your stance has to be strong. It has to be strong, and you can't come at them with a apologetic tone that I've seen women sometimes. Even on our team, I was just talking about to someone else who was posting something in Teams, and she disagreed with other people in our group on our leadership team, and she's like, I hope you guys don't mind. And I told her, I said, listen, in our one-on-one, don't ever do that again. I said, I barely almost couldn't see what you put because you keep apologizing for the fact that you disagree. You need to disagree. You need to be strong in your disagreement, and it is okay. If everybody disagrees, including me, that's okay. That doesn't mean you don't stop posting and putting in what you need to put in. And she just laughed. She's like, I know, but I don't want people, it's like, I don't want people to be mad at me type of, it's like, type of.
People are going to be mad at you for their own issues. I mean, they're going to be mad at you one way or the other.
Yeah, and I've seen that with women. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, if we can just remove those two words.
And I think a lot of that is training and modeling and practicing. So having those, we used to run a crucial conversations, and they're so good at helping people. Because when you have to even say to your supervisor, hey, I'm not feeling heard, because they do have power, they do, but to be able to have practicing those conversations, keeping it very, professional, simple. When you do this, I feel like you're not listening to me. When you do this, I feel that, But so let's talk about cross-culturally, because one of the questions posted in the chat, in the context of the same culture, so at the country level, how do we still ensure that people still feel they belong, especially in relation to the needs of different generations? So that's an interesting. A lot of my African students would say, there's no way I can challenge anybody who's a decade older than me, and it's just not culturally appropriate, even if you're being harmed.
And I've heard that in the African American community when I was even younger in leadership. I remember not getting one of the jobs that I was going after simply because of my age, and the person was clear about that. He said, an older person isn't going to listen to you. And so he said, I need a older person in the role, which was discriminatory, but that's another table talk, right? But I think a lot of still how upper leadership is handling the challenge and modeling it makes a difference. If you're trying to lead from the middle, that is an incredibly difficult and frustrating place to be. Very difficult. Top down with culture absolutely works.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does. It absolutely
You
works.
you need country directors that are modeling it. You need regional vice presidents that are modeling it. Because I've often thought, all of our research about diversity is focused mostly on the Western world. I've never seen
Yeah.
a study that looks at, do organizations in Kenya perform better if there's diversity of Kikuyu tribe, Lua tribe, which have had, conflict challenges in the past. Are we expecting it of our national offices? Diversity might look very different. So it's around tribal, it's around,
Yeah.
age diversity. It's absolutely around gender diversity. Although I will say many of the field offices and organizations have even greater representation of women. So
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
it's a headquarter issue or what, but
It
yeah,
is definitely more women. I see Clement's on the call, definitely more women now than there were in country office. But I think also understanding your manager's perspective really helps as well. Because they're going to have they have their own experiences. They have a boss as well, potentially, depending on where you are in the hierarchy. So it really is helpful to understand where they're coming from, what is it that they are expecting, as well as it relates to diversity. Even internationally, even with the gender work, I mean, it's taken a couple of years, but there's been very successful from going from all male country directors to now female country directors. And so it is possible, even with all the diversity, even with when you look at the tribalism and very hierarchical approach to making decisions. And it's still, yet it happened.
Yeah.
There was a focus, there was understanding, and it happened. Did everybody agree? I would probably be very safe to say probably not, but yet it still happened.
Well, and I think that has a lot to do with senior leadership, yourself
I was going to say
included.
the right people were in agreement.
This is the way we're going.
Yeah.
I know, so I am friends with Ava, wrote a book together.
Yeah.
And she had shared about World Relief using the Wheaton gender scorecard that we developed in 2018. And that's been very helpful for World Relief, particularly in the field offices, for looking at where gender needs to be reviewed in policies, in HR practices, in leadership practices and stuff. So I think it was just one division that had started using it at World Relief. I don't think it's organization wide yet, but you can correct me on that if you know.
Right. That's correct. Actually, we're looking at doing something similar with the cultural focal points.
Okay.
We're really mimicking some of the work that was done, the gender work, and doing the same type of, with the same type of approach.
Yeah. That
And
scorecard is very
thing.
flexible. Yeah,
Yes.
scorecard is very flexible. You take women out and you put culture in, and you're still getting at the same issue.
Yeah. And it is a way to blend it into your practice. We blended in even the diversity work into policy, into even from, as an example, the interview panels need to be diverse now, not all majority culture, whatever that majority culture is, either for that office, and they have to reach out to various audiences for posting the position as well, not just the traditional Indeed, LinkedIn, reach out to some of their culture partners as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. We're coming up on the close. Let me check one more time. Florence, you had a hand up briefly, but I'm not sure if you had just hit the hand up button. But did anybody else have any questions that they wanted to ask of Alexis before we sign off for the day? All right. Well, thank you again, Alexis. This has been a good conversation. You and I could keep going for hours on this subject. But just really appreciate the time. And I know you're super busy, so thank you for coming on. We will be circulating the LinkedIn the YouTube video link to this when it's done. Jackie does all of our great editing work for that. So yeah, thank you so much for everybody for joining us and for the good questions posted in the chat, for Alexis for your time. And we just pray blessings upon blessings over continued good work at World Relief. Thank
you so much for having me. It was a great way to break up the day as well. So thank you.
Exactly. All right. Take care, everybody.
All righty. Bye-bye.